Yeah. Sorry for the delay. I'm not used to streaming on YouTube. But I think we're here. And it shows we're live. So I guess that's a plus. Get things centered up there a little bit. I clean my face shield a little bit. I was doing a bunch of other stuff today, so I better clean this off a little bit so I can at least hopefully see what we're doing. So we're going to make a little lidded box out of this, is what the plan is. Now that we finally got the streaming software to cooperate. It's already been turned around because I wanted to be able to take a good picture of it to show what it looked like. And it's still between centers, but we're going to need a tenant on either end. We'll make sure everything is secure before we turn the speed up. So we'll just put a little tenant on each end. Some of which of this is resin, which makes it a little troublesome. Which we may have to get our other little hose out. I have sort of a way that I found to get rid of these resin chips that want to wrap around everything. Definitely don't need a giant sized tenant on either end. This is a very small piece of wood. It's only about a little over 3 inches in diameter. Do need this to be a little straighter than what it is though. So that's our tenant on both ends. Now we have to figure out which is going to be the top. And I looked at this piece earlier. These stripes will go away because that's just a place that this was actually cast as a solid square block. So I think I'm going to leave the lid to be the all wood and use a lot more of the base to be the resin part, which a tenant can be part of the lid. So I think we'll just leave about an inch for the lid. That's going to leave me about 2 inches, a little more maybe for the base. And then we'll go ahead and cut it off. And we don't want to necessarily don't want to part the whole way through because it is between centers. So if we were to part the whole way through, it's going to bind it. It would not be a pretty situation. I could have went on a little bit further. My light's not quite in the right place to actually see real well how small that was getting. A little Japanese pool saw. And it takes a minute to cut it in half, cut it apart. Better to do it that way than run the risk of it breaking or cutting the whole way through, and then things are going to fly. And I don't necessarily want things to fly. So we have it in two pieces. So now we'll drop one piece underneath. Pretty much you can get rid of the tailstock. We won't need that at all anymore. We put that the whole way down to the end with the live center out. And then we'll get our chuck. Last little tap on there is this, makes it extra secure. Just messing with other stuff today. We got a bunch of dirt in the jaws. Clean that out. Good solid contact all the way around. If our tenant's at least close to being properly sized. Piece of this size, I'm not really overly concerned about that. We'll tighten it up. First order of business, we're going to clean up the face. So that it's smooth and all that good stuff. And straight, reasonably straight anyhow. I will just use a small bowl gouge. And we could switch a view around here so you can actually see it in both fashions. Okay. Rare earth magnets are nice, but they don't. I use them to hold my little wrench because I broke the lever on this. Kind of wasn't very well made as far as I was concerned, but nonetheless it did break on me. So I'm just now using a wrench on it rather than spending extra money to buy a new one. That would probably break again, so just use a wrench, it works. Do want to do one other thing before I start that. Yeah, looks okay. So we're going to take this, we're going to get rid of the rest of this resin right off the bat. Not quite. Some of the resin part is actually a little bit hard on cutting edge tools, because it feels like it's already sort of knocked a little bit of the edge off of that bowl gouge. So I'm just going to touch it up just a little bit here with the diamond hone, just to get through the rest of that resin. When I get to the part where it's all resin, I will just use a negative rate scraper. I could probably use a negative rate scraper on this right now as well. Or right now we're just getting rid of the rest. That's good. There's just a tiny little bit left on there. Rather than running over there sharpening, I do have a second one. Hopefully that's sharp. We want to give this a little bit of a shape. And I want it to be sort of flat down here, because we're going to put a bead on there, which is what we'll do next. And then we can do some more shaping. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to the beads. I have the D-Way beading tool, so I will use it and make a nice, perfect bead. And stop and look and make sure it didn't chip anything. It didn't. It usually doesn't, but there's always that time when it might. This is box elder that has been stabilized, so it is pretty hard. It shouldn't chip out much. So now we'll go to our spindle gouge. We'll get us a nice shape down into that corner. It's basically a nice little concave. And as we hit the corner, if we roll over a little bit on it, it's all well and good. Close the flute and it actually acts as a scraper. So now we can get rid of some. I don't know why these magnets want to slide on this thing today. Normally don't. So now we'll come around to the end and we can switch to our parting tool. Should I put it away, I guess? Where did I? Where did I put the parting tool? know I had it. Laid it over here because I was supposed to sharpen it. And I didn't. But it's probably sharp. Find out. So we kind of have to get an eyeball on about where that bead sits in there. I'm gonna go well inside of it. We get rid of the material right there. Which should be well inside of it. Then we'll go back to our bowl gouge to get rid of some more of this material. Because we don't need our lid to be heavy. So now we can sort of try and figure out about where we want to leave ourselves enough material to be able to make sure that we're sized. That's not right. That won't work that way. I guess we're just going to have to go by eye. We can't really measure that very well. So we need our recess, which I need to raise the tool rest because this will be a negative rake scraper. And basically, its only job in the world is to do recesses like this. What I want is this recess to be square. This will allow me to do so, and we moved that way too high. Can also clean up this face a little bit. A little bit concaved will be good. We don't necessarily want this to be, I don't want this to be totally flat across here. So if it's a little bit concaved, it'll always sit perfectly flat on the lid itself. So we need to dish out a little bit more of that material. It's probably easier to do it with a negative rake scraper than it is to do it with the bowl gouge. At least that's my opinion. You're in a little bit more control. If I wouldn't have taken my bowl gouge, my little bowl gouge, and made it into a 40/40 grind on that one, I could have used that small one in here, but to use a regular 1/2 inch bowl gouge is a little bit more challenging. So the negative, there's just a little scraper in there, just makes life a little bit easier. Our tenon certainly can be a little bit longer than what it is. So I'm going to reach in there and get in this corner and get rid of a little bit more of that so that I'm not trying to get, when I use my recess tool, I don't necessarily want to go in there and have it dig in. And seeing how that stabilized burl, it will do a very good job with the scrapers on it. Even if it wasn't, it still would be, if it wasn't stabilized, it would still be all end grain. So now we can sand that a little bit. And just get fresh sandpaper. And we'll see whether, I know when we get to the bottom part, we will be sanding using water because the resin just gums up the sandpaper. But if you use water, and the sandpaper I use is a wet dry sandpaper, so it will do a better job. So we'll turn our speed down nice and slow, 400 or 500 RPMs, because you are sanding by hand. It can be a little tricky in a lot of ways just to even get in here to really sand this very well, because I really don't necessarily want to sand the shoulder in there. Can knock that corner off a little bit. Sand just a little bit of our bead. The bead doesn't need much, really doesn't even hardly need any sanding at all, period. Because those beading tools cut it so cleanly that sanding is kind of second fiddle when it comes to that. So that was 220. Don't go back very far. I only go back as far as what I need to, as far as grits go. I don't need to put giant size scratches in there. And we'll go right up through the grits. Like I say, these are kind of challenging in a way to get in here. I probably could use just a smaller piece of sandpaper would help too. But they'll be smooth. Now we're at 400. I will touch this recess a little bit. Well, let's take that corner a little bit more. At 400, we could actually sand this entire bead. Clean off our dirt. And then we will go to 600. And that'll be pretty much as high as I go on the sandy grits on that. It does have some really nice pretty grain. I'm looking for any scratches that might be visible. I can also take a little bit of 800 grit sandpaper and do a little random orbit sanding or little circles in there, which will help break up all those little radial lines, especially out here where they're more visible. And then we can take a paper towel and clean off our dirt. Paper towel is really a very good, I've found that a paper towel really works well for cleaning off the dust and dirt off of things like this, out of almost everything. And it's pretty much like, in some ways, like using about 800 grit sandpaper on something anyhow. So now we need to think about how we're going to finish, because we need to finish the inside of that lid now. It's the only time to have total access to it. So in this case, since it's a stabilized piece of wood, it's not going to absorb much material. So this time I'm going to use the Parfix 3460, which is a slow setting CA glue. And we'll put one light coat or one coat of that on there. It won't absorb much because this is stabilized, but it will get in the pores anyhow in there and seal everything up. And it'll give us a nice finish on the inside. This whole thing will be finished with this same product. It's slow setting, no odor. That particular level has about 45 to 50 seconds of time delay before it starts to set up. So when you're using something like that on raw wood, it soaks in and then really absorbs into the wood and doesn't sit. What I'm looking for is I don't want anything sitting on the surface. Unlike you would finish a pen or something like that, multiple coats. This is a one coat application in this case. You could do multiple coats, but I don't want to. I'm not a big fan of sanding a whole bunch if I don't have to. I am going to hit it with one shot of activator. At a distance, I'm going to sweep across like you were spray painting something. Start out across and just spray one spray across it. Give that a minute to do its thing. You don't want to spray the accelerator up close and personal. No matter whose CA glue it is, it just causes it to set up too quickly, and that's why you get the foaming and the bubbling and all that. So that's good for now. Now we're going to work on the base. Here's where we might have to get the trusty dust collection hose out. This resin is really a pain when it comes to, I think, because all the stream goes straight up in the air and wants to wrap around everything. So I'm just going to sit this off to the side here for the moment. And just like the piece earlier, or just like the lid, we're going to clean up this face first. And then we will size the tenon down here. One little light cut. Now we have it clean. I'm going to knock that edge. I'm going to touch that edge with the edge of the tool. That edge right there, since you've cut across it, became a razor blade. And it would slice your fingers very, very quickly. So I always get in the habit of just touching it. That's all I do. It's not like I'm trying to make a giant size chunk out of it or anything like that. It's just a little touch feature. Now we're going to take our lid and our dividers. And I'll set my dividers close and shy on the big side, because we'll make that fit properly otherwise. So we'll scribe with the left leg and match up with the right leg. And once we get that matched up, then we can push a little bit harder on it and get a deeper line. And now we can come back around to the front face, and then we'll go back to our parting tool. And that should not even be close. But I did make it a little bit of a taper. It just makes it a little easier. And like I say, we're not even close. So now we can go back in and square it up down to our taper and give it another taper. This is the way I was taught by Jimmy Clues on how to make boxes, make tenants that fit really well. So we're getting close on that. So if we're lucky, we'll get one more shot. Straighten it up. Another little taper. And our tenant's going to be longer than that. So this way, now you screwed up and you went too far. You've only lost 1/8 of an inch of material rather than 1/4 of an inch. So we know we got to stop short of that. We might as well get rid of some of that. Once again, we're not quite there. I'm going to make this a little bit wider. Once again, we'll give it a taper. Hopefully we don't go too small the second time. That's really close to actually going up on. So now we know that we don't need much. We're just going to flatten it out just a little bit. Close but no cigar. This is where it takes patience. And just keep removing just a little bit and give it just a tiny little taper on the end. And there, it's right there. I could probably force fit that on there, but I don't want to crack the lid. So what we will do, we will just go back here, just a little bit, tiny little bit on the very back, because now we know it's tapered. And now that's our force fit. That's nice and snug. We can make that tenant a little bit bigger, which we will. But at this point, that gave us a place to be able to go in here and mark where the actual lid sits. So we'll just, I shouldn't have marked that. Now I'm going to make the tenant just a little bit bigger than what it is. Now we're still at a force fit, which is good because you can, if I leave that as a force fit right now, we're going to shape this and hollow it, and then when I come back, I can actually use that force fit to turn the lid and then just take that little extra off of the base. Maybe I shouldn't have forced it on there so tight. Man, we got that on there tight. Too tight. That is way too tight. Tighter than what we need it to be to. But I think for right now, I think we'll leave that alone. Oh, I wanted to. Maybe I'm going to loosen that up just a little bit. See, now you knocked it out in the chuck. You're banging on it. Yep. Yep. Just take just a tiny little whisker off, a little bit of sawdust. Hopefully that loosens it up enough that it still is gonna go on. It's still too tight. It's still tight at the back end of it. Like I say, we'll get to that then. And now I can get it off, so that's a plus. We can make this sort of, I don't know, some sort of a shape. So we need to be about halfway. Need to know about halfway. I'm not totally worried that it's perfectly halfway, but close is good enough. And now we can shape that part, knowing that we have where the outside part of that lid is at, but we sort of want to be on the inside of that lid. It can't be very aggressive because there's quite a bit of resin in this part. I probably really should just use the scrapers rather than that because it sounded like it was chunking it. Because you have a tendency to be too aggressive with the cutting tools in the resin, or at least I do. So I found that just a simple scraper, sharp edge scraper, this really doesn't even need to have a burr on it. Actually, a lot of times it's better off if it doesn't have a burr on it. Once we get to where it's more resin than wood, that will come into play. So we'll just give it a little rounded shape. I should have put that in there straight. You can also use a skew for this. Most people don't like to use a skew period, but a skew works really well on this too because it's a sharp edge. Need to back this up a little bit. Just have to watch. You don't want the bevel to drop off the edge. But generally the skews are a little bit lighter material. At least that particular one there is. So we'll use back to our little scraper. Try and start to knock some of that corner off. And like I say, since it only requires a sharp edge and no burr, it doesn't matter which side of it I use. And when it starts to not cut very well, which it's actually starting to do right now, like I say, the resin is hard on tools. I just take a diamond cardstone hone, and I will take it and I will just hone that edge. And this is how I sharpen my skews as while I'm using them. Would be to go right across that, and it'll become a razor sharp edge again. And it'll go right back to cutting well. Almost think I need to turn a dust collector on. This stuff is rather obnoxiously dusty, and that's because it's stabilized material. I'm going to sneak my dust collector hose in here, try and keep it off to the side and out of the field of view. And we can check our fit, check our where we're at, the lid. We know we need to take a lot more off down there. And clean up that face in there because that was a parting tool cut. I'm basically looking to get the front end of this the way I want it. And then we'll sort of worry about the back end. This will just be like a, I don't know, a little rounded shape to it really. Can't say that I've ever had the pleasure of getting one that tight to stay that tight. But we'll see what it does when we cut from behind. Now we're going to work on taking a little bit of this off of the back. This is basically a negative. This is a negative brake scraper that has no burr on it. It's just sharp. Whereas, even though this actually was a skew. It now lives its life pretty much as a negative brake scraper. But it's not really, not no high end, not very high quality steel in it. That end definitely will need tucked in quite a bit more. We can tuck in a little bit better than what we have. We just have to stay away from the jaws of the chuck. So I'll actually finish that bottom on a jam chuck. So I'm really more concerned about what the shape is at the top. We'll make sure it's a nice flowing shape. And then we'll hollow it out. Nice light touch. Should give us a nice clean cut across the resin, which is the part that we're most concerned about because the resin is the hardest part to cut cleanly. Like I say, the resin generally likes to be scraped. That's why all the people that are carbide fans, that's why they make out so well using carbide on it, because all it is a sharp edge. I think that looks as well as I can. At least the shape from here, basically up to the middle point, I think looks okay. But I can't necessarily, this is where you're utilizing smaller pieces of material because it is a burl. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to get a nicer shape, because that inevitably, once we finish with it, it's going to be down to the tenant, and the tenant may or may not be part of it. At least that's the way I do them. I'm going to make sure that I have this a little bit concaved in there. I'll take just a hair off of this tenant too. Start fighting with the lid. Now I'll probably make it too. Now I'll make it loose. If there's ways around that, which I did, that's actually the fit that I would be looking for the finished piece. And I just wanted to make sure that our proportions look right, and they look okay to me. So now we're going to go ahead and hollow this thing out. Once again, multitude of different ways of hollowing it out. To me, it's generally whichever's easiest and fastest. I'm not necessarily a big fan of drilling holes in them, but you can. And on one like this, it might be beneficial to do so. But this is, like I say, it is a stabilized piece of wood, so it's genuinely harder. Just going to get a place for my drill bit to start in there. I'm going to slow our speed way down. This drill bit is what you call way overkill. This is one that I use to do hollow forms. So it's not, if we go into our tape, we want to go in probably a little bit less than our tape. We're going to bring our speed down, about 600 RPM, something like that. Get it up in the middle, and just give it a push. Use just a little bit more steam than that. Pull it out, tap off the crap. Like I say, a lot of that down in there is going to be resin. And as you see, it clogs up the flutes quite quickly. So now it's done two things for us. It's opened our hole up, as well as giving us the part that we don't have to mess with the center part. And now we can pretty much use whatever we want. We can use our small spindle gouge. We can use a big spindle gouge. You can use scrapers. Whatever works for you. You have hollowing tools. There's some boring bars that'll do this well. And you can't see what you're doing. So the drill hole is your friend, because we can drop the nose of the spindle gouge in there. And the spindle gouge is pretty much over on its side, just slight bit open. You just have to watch because the spindle gouge will drill a hole just as well as the drill bit. So. And stop and take a look and see where our drill hole is at. Make sure we're not. There's the bottom, pretty much the bottom of the drill hole. We can take just a little bit more out of there. And we're nowhere near the thickness that we want out in here. So we can either, might as well keep on going a little bit with a spindle gouge. We'll clean up a little bit more of this up here because this is too thick. Because ultimately we're going to go in there and we're going to clean all that out, clean the rest of it out and clean it up with the scraper. Right now we're probably a solid ½ inch thick or more in there. The bigger ½ inch spindle gouge right there makes it a little bit better because it'll allow you to have the overhang instead of like the 3/8 would be squealing. I'm going to go back and I'm going to sharpen this edge again. And then we'll go in here with our scraper and hopefully I'm going to have to move that camera just a little bit over that way so that I can get my scraper in here. Scraper also needs to be on center, so I have to raise the tool rest just a little bit. Once again, it's a place you could use some hollowing tools if you have them. Not necessarily somewhere you have to have them. I'm going to hollow the top part first. Get that to about where I think I want it, which we're not there yet. I have to make sure I stay inside, stay below where this rim is at when I go back underneath. Otherwise, you cut the rim off, or you break it off when you try to do other things with it. And a lot of time just cleaning everything out, although it's not doing too bad on that part. We're still plenty thick. I'm going to go over here quick, and I'm going to put a burr back on that scraper. See if it'll cut a little bit faster in there. I may go to a different little scraper to go in there too. Scrapers don't necessarily hold a burr very long. That particular one there is made by Doug Thompson, and I can tell you this much, that one holds a burr much longer than something that's a lesser quality, lesser grade of tool. It still won't last very long. But like I say, a lot of this is resin, so it doesn't necessarily want the burr. It's kind of one of these gray areas where the wood wants the burr and the resin doesn't. They kind of have to compromise as to which is which. We're just trying to make a flowing curve. In there. You feel with your fingers. Like I say, this doesn't have to be super duper thin. I mean, we're probably still a good 3/8 of an inch, maybe even more. We definitely want to get it down a little bit thinner than that. All kind of different shapes of scrapers. The particular one I was using is new, so it doesn't have as much of a shape one as what this is made by D-Way. It actually says Boxmaster, but Boxmaster and D-Way is the same people. So it has it's ground a little bit further around the edge, so it's going to allow me to get back up underneath there a little better, I think. The chips have nowhere to go in this. This is sort of like doing hollow forms, where all you get done doing is cleaning out the chips because they have nowhere to go. Sort of have to be a little bit gentle because it's not in a handle. It's long. It's probably 10 inches long or whatever. And it's not meant to be an aggressive tool. I'm not trying to take out giant sized cuts. I'm just smoothing up this area in here. And I would say we're down to, I probably can't get the, wish somebody would actually make something small enough to reach in. I think there is one to do. I shouldn't say that. It's just the fact that they're quite expensive. And they really don't do what you want them to do. Or at least what I want them to do. I just go by the old finger test. So we're good probably down into about here. So then I'll work from there, the bottom up around this curve here, keeping the curve less on the bottom because we know we want to tuck that down in some more. So I'll go back to the other scraper. And that should be giving us a nice curve. You feel with your fingers, feel any lumps and bumps and ridges. There's some ridges right down in here that's going to have to be removed. It'd be almost impossible to sand out. And we have a tiny little dot down at the very bottom where the drill hole is at. So I need to take just a little bit more of that out. Really need to regrind that drill bit so that it's not so pointy. See if I can raise just a little bit of a burr. A lot of people tell you you can raise enough of a burr just by honing them. It'll raise that little bit of a burr up there. So we'll try that on that rather than going back over and grinding it. So there's kind of a nasty little line right in there. We definitely need to get out. And that was successful. Can't feel the line no more, so we're in good shape. I actually created a line behind it a little bit further. So we'll just blend them couple little things together. And I think that'll be good. For the inside. Now let's see what it did for our lid. If you're doing these in stabilized wood, it shouldn't have done anything. That lid's still a little tight on the fit. It's not tight enough that I probably can't turn it like that because it'll pop it off. it will need to be loosened up a little bit. But now at this point we can thin this down a little bit because we don't need that so big and chunky, so to speak. And you can even make it sort of a little bit round. Don't necessarily need to make this side round, but it's not going to hurt anything. Just makes everything nice and soft to the touch. Now we're going to sand in there. This is where we'll see whether we need to sand wet or dry. This is a lot of resin in there. We'll see what it does to the sandpaper. That's not too bad. And then when it's pure, when there's a real lot of resin, then you're gonna have. Then I sand with it wet. That way it doesn't clog the sandpaper up right away. So we started with 220. I need a paper towel because we want to keep the dirt. Mainly want to keep the grit from contaminating the next grit. Because there'd be little particles of 220 paper in there. So if we went in with 320, all we're doing is smearing the 220 grit paper around, scratches. On the inside of something like this, it's like, nobody's really going to know the difference for the most part. But when we get to the outside is where it's going to become more evident. I don't know if we can get the paper towel to cooperate. That was 320. Go to 400. Now that we're at 400, we know our lid is a little bit thick and we're going to have to put a little paper towel in there to hold it. So I might as well sand that edge a little bit with 400 while we're there. One paper towel going into the dust collector. This is not going directly into a dust collector either. There's a cyclone sitting over here beside my lathe. It goes into that before it goes into the actual dust collector. So that was 400. We're going to do 600 just because it's resin in there. The smaller the scratches in the resin, the better it'll be. We're going to give it the same treatment as we did the inside of the lid, and we're going to put some of the Parfix 3460 in there as well. And then we will come back and polish that as well. So when you're dealing with the slower setting CA glues, they don't necessarily, well, none of the CA glues actually, they may set up what you think in a matter of a couple seconds or whatever, but they're really not hard and cured for like 24 hours. So we'll go back and we'll do the same thing to the inside of this as what we did the outside, or the inside of the lid. We'll go back and we'll put a nice coat of the 3460 in there. This time we're going to spin it really slow. Pretty much as slow as the lathe will go. Because now I have a rubber glove on. I don't want to get my finger stuck in there. So we'll give that a nice coat. we can come out and we can do the edge of our rim. Really didn't need to get it up around there, but that's not sanded yet, so we have to sand that, so it's no big deal. Rub it in, make sure I got a good, sort of good thick coat on there. Although since this is stabilized, it's really not going to soak a whole lot of it in. Like if I give it a chance to start to set up, what it will do for me is it will fill up some of those 600 and 800 grit scratches in there that'll be in the resin part, which will help me. When we get to the outside of this part, outside part out here, it'll show more so yet what I'm talking about. I'm going to wipe off the excess and do just like I did with the other piece. I am going to spray a little accelerator in there, and then we're going to go back and polish the lid, and then we'll sand as much of the outside as what we can. This is where you just keep bouncing back and forth. I didn't hit that with accelerator, did I? I moved it and didn't do it. Just one squirt right in there, basically right in the hole, 12 to 18 inches away, just to get it started. Once the polymerization process is started, that's all it takes. We're going to go back to our lid. We give it a polish. If you have the proper size tenon, it's really hard to tell where I'm not really worried about that one. All we're doing is polishing, so usually you can see the little indentations, but for whatever reason on that one, I can't seem to see them. Lots of the abrasive paste out there. I have two different ones. I have this Yorkshire grit, which is sort of a very popular one. I also have another one that there's a private individual that's making them. I can't say that either one of them is much different than the other. So we're just going to smear it around and give it a spin, a couple hundred RPMs. Fair amount of pressure on it. At least that's how I use it. You put a little bit more in. You want to slow it down a little bit when you go to put that in, or you'll be wearing it. Give it some speed, a little bit of pressure. It does have a wax in it, so it'll melt the wax and give it a nice, really nice, simple shine to it. And that's the inside finished. The inside of the lid is totally finished now. I might as well keep that out. So now we'll go to our box, the bottom part. Go back to the bottom part, I guess you'd say. And we might as well, while we're at this place, now spin it in reverse. And we're going to sand the top part of this while we're here. It's kind of gum up sandpaper. See whether it's giving us really big scratches as well. But I think in order to combat that, we're just going to sand it wet. When you sand it wet, it actually, to me, it cuts faster, which would make sense. It's lubricated. The sandpaper will last a whole lot longer because it doesn't get clogged up. We just have to keep the speed down while we're sanding or you get wet. And we'll try and get back about halfway. Clean off our gunk. Let's stop and take a look at it and see where we're at. It looks all right for 220. We'll go to 320. And now we've started sanding wet. We'll continue to sand wet. It's just easier, I think. And I am still sanding in reverse. I could go back the other way if you want, if I wanted to. Some ways when you do it wet where nothing's going to fly or you're not creating dust, it's almost easier. You see the amount of slurry that's being generated by the sandpaper. If you go too fast, you get a bath, like I just did. So that's 320. Wipe off the slurry worry. We'll go to 400. Paper towel, clean it off. 600. Keep it plenty wet. It works better that way. And then we're going to go to 800. Actually, we could go to 1,000 even on the outside because, and it's all because of the resin. The higher I can go with the resin part, the better off I'll be. Because the resin is what really scratches, shows the scratches. So we'll go to 800. And last but not least, 1,000. And we can take our same 1,000 grit and do a little random orbit sanding. to break up because now all of our scratches are concentric circles around that. So if we don't break them up, you're going to be able to see them. So this just simple little random orbit action here will break all those little scratches up that you won't be able to see them because they're no longer in a straight line and your eye will not pick them up. You get to go through quite a few paper towels. That's interesting. I didn't take enough. Actually didn't take enough off, and it left a tiny little dot of resin right there. I don't know that I like that. But once we flip this back around, why, then we can do something about that. And we'll get rid of my water and my wet sandpaper. And I guess we could go strictly back overhead. Would make sense. We also need this to be dry on the outside here. I'm going to give it a fairly good spin. I'm going to put my paper towel, dry paper towel up against it to heat it up and get rid of the moisture. Because I also want to be able to finish the top part of this while it's in this configuration. Just once again, we're going to go back to our same CA that we've been using. And we're going to finish up. We're going to finish the top part up here. This time we can do it while it's spinning, nice and slowly. It doesn't go like below 200 RPMs on your lathe. Don't do it this way because you'll wear it and you don't want super glue in your face or worse yet in your eyes. So just put a nice coat on there. Give it a little bit to dry. We clean the tip of our bottle. We're getting rid of the other excess piece off the paper towel. And we're going to wipe off the excess. As you can see, the difference between where we didn't do and where we did, you can tell it's soaking into the wood, but even though it's stabilized, there's still some pores that are open. The stabilizing process does not, at least how I do it, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but it doesn't totally fill all the pores of the wood up. At least I don't feel that it does. So that just that one little light coat of CA on there has now filled up all those pores, and they're golden. I am going to accelerate it because I want to keep moving. So one swipe, high to low, down across it. That's it. That's all I'm going to do to it. From there, the outside, we're going to finish this bottom, sand it, seal it the same way, and then we will buff that as well as the lid. I'm going to get my glove off without tearing it. We're going to polish the inside, just like we did with the lid. We're going to go back to the same Yorkshire grit. You're going to get it in there, spin it around, move it around by hand before you turn the lathe on. At least that's what they tell you to do, put it that way. It doesn't really matter on the inside of something like that to me. It's not going to go anywhere. why they tell you that otherwise is so that you don't get a face full of it. So once the grid has done its job, we need to get rid of excess of that. It can also bring the speed up higher and it'll polish it. A simple paper towel. You can even use like the shop towels or something like that. It might be a little bit softer than what the normal paper towel would be. I've never really seen a whole lot of difference. That's giving us a nice high satin shine in there. It's nice and smooth to the touch and slippery. That's what we're looking for. So that's the base part complete. And have to put some things away here so that we can go back to our lid. The lid's a little bit tight, so we will probably have to loosen that up a little bit. But for right now, we're going to leave that alone. And they actually should probably try and get one ply of a 2-ply paper towel in there. Right now it'll slide off. So 1 ply should be enough. That made it much more rigid. We're going to bring a tailstock up. We're not taking the chance of it flying away. Mainly because of the directions that we're going to be cutting. I sort of like just a simple domed lid. That's the one that I've come up with that I like. And I'm kind of the maker, so I do the things that I like to do the way I like to do it. We're going to step back and we're going to look and see whether we like the shape that we have. I tore out some little chunks. I suppose shouldn't do that. Guess we were being a little bit too aggressive on it. We'll lighten up our cut. If that doesn't work, we'll go to a spindle guide rather than a bowl guide. that took care of it. Also left us a very sharp edge here. Just looking to see whether I don't quite remember how deep we hollowed that. I don't think I went that overly deep with it. Let's take this a little bit more off. I can leave that little nub there, bring it back down to speed. Now my sandpaper is all wet. I have to get dry sandpaper again to sand that part. Bring our trusty dust collector up. And actually I can sand in reverse, it would make it easier. Does a better job dust collection wise for me, because the dust shoots right there then. In this edge, we will round this edge strictly with sandpaper rather than trying to cut it off. Because chances are when you cut it off, you're going to break some of it. So it's just easier to do it with sandpaper where you're more in control. At least that's how I do it, put it that way. So we started with 220. I try not to go back any further than I have to in sandpaper. So a lot of times you'll see me start, especially stuff like this. I could probably even start with 320 maybe. But I don't like to get the whole way to where I'm ready to finish something to figure out that, oh shoot, there's some scratches or a little tool mark or something that you missed. So let's just go in forward so I can see what I'm doing better out here on this part. And I also didn't get rid of the very bottom yet. I just wanted to sand with the first couple grits or whatever to make sure we were going to be good on the shape. That still has some places that's torn a little bit. I think I'm going to go back and try a little bit with the scraper on that. I mean, it is a burl, so I'm going to have to go put a burl on this scraper. I'm going to go in there and see if I can't get that more to my liking. And that took care of those little pits in there that wanted to like pull out or something or other. So we'll go back. This is now just 320. The scraper leaves a really, really nice surface as long as it has a good burr on it and you're gentle. And this, like I say, this stuff is stabilized, so it's relatively pretty hard, so to speak. I always take the time to wipe the grit off. Go on to 400. Yeah, 400. Making sure we leave a nice soft edge on there, because that's going to be the gripping point to take the lid on and off. So we'll hit 600 in here. And then 800 in there. One piece of 800. 800 paper is very, very thin. They like to stick together. Because we still have to cut that little bit off the top. So we'll just get this bit in here finished up. And then we'll take our tailstock out of the way. And here's where you sort of have to hope for the best, and we'll be very careful. We'll probably just do it all with a scraper. That way all the force is going to go that direction. We're also going to push that dust hose back, because if it does come off, I don't want to chase it in the dust collector. Been there, done that a few too many times. It should be solid enough. Like I say, we'll just take it nice and easy. You give it a look, make sure you want it to be a flowing curve. I got to get back here to on the side so that I can see the curve. That looks better. Now I'll go right back to finish sanding. We can go back. Probably can actually sand a little bit of this by hand first. Generally just across the center. The center is a very hard part to get, so if I take the time to sand just the center by hand, it'll go much better. And that was 400 that we started with there. So we're basically sanding for the most part just the middle, but as you can see, I'm not stopping at just the middle. So that's 400. Go to 600. Wiping off the dirt, or the grit rather, not really the dirt, but you do them both. Go to 800. At this point, we'll go the whole way out to the edge. And then we'll stop. Then we'll do a little 800 random orbit. And make sure we have no scratches. You can even do a little bit in here, carefully. Remember, we sanded all this in the same direction. There was no change of direction. So we could easily have concentric scratch marks in here. Once again, our paper towel. We're going to clean it off with a paper towel. And it's ready for finishing, which is next step. It's all being finished with the same stuff. It's all the 3460 in a Parfix CA. Once again, we can spin this one pretty much as slow as my lathe will run. Dust hose out of the road. Give this a nice coat on the outside. This part in here we're going to be a little bit more careful with. I don't want to get any that goes down over that edge and would go down into the other part of the lid. Because we don't want to stick our lid fast to the base. But since it is slow setting, we're not in any big hurry. I put the glue bottle away. If this was just natural wood, we'd have about 50 seconds before it would set up. This will set up a little bit quicker because the resin, or partly the resin and the stabilizing is some sort of a plastic as well. And now we're drying off the excess. Do it while it's running, do it while it's off. Give it a little spin. Once again, I am gonna accelerate this. My climate here in Pennsylvania, I could get away without accelerating it. I would just have to sit it off to the side and it would be set up in a matter of a couple minutes. But if you live in a dry, arid part of the country, you may have to use accelerator. So that's our lid complete. Our lid is actually finished and ready for buffing. I'll sit that off to the side. I'll leave that here a second. Like I said, that lid, that's, no, it's not. I was thinking that, okay, well, the polishing part took care of that. I'm going to sit that off to the side, out of harm's way. And now we have to finish the base. To me, the easiest way to finish bases of things like this, it's just a simple jam chuck, basically. We do need a dimension. We can take that out. And that particular jam block was used with a bigger set of jaws. So I'm going to have to decrease the diameter of that tenon by a bunch, but I still have a center mark down there. So I can just take and put it up against the jaws. and then we will make a smaller size tenon to fit those set of jaws, and then we'll go from there. These little blocks are leftovers from some candlestick things that I did for some of my wife's painting friends. I have like probably 40 or 50 of these blocks about that size. So I have like a half a lifetime supply of little blocks. So overhead doesn't show anything. So go back to that view so you can see a little bit more of what we're doing. But just sort of like what we did with the rest of a lot of the other stuff, we're going to mark. That was too big. That's about it right there. Parting tool, which we put away. Going to stay inside of our line. It's pure end grain of hard maple. As you can see, the negative ray scrapers do an awesome job on that. Just a little easier to get rid of the material quickly. And that should not even closely fit, but we might as well make sure that it doesn't even come close. And it doesn't. So now it's sort of like the same deal with the lid. We're going to fit it. Because this is what's going to hold our box on. And right there is the fit that we're looking for, but it is not quite deep enough. Also reminding me, like I wasn't very straight, but that doesn't really hurt us. So just go in here and I'll take a little bit more out. Once again, if we have to use a piece of paper towel, it certainly is no big deal. Not going to hurt us in the least. I want that to fit super snug, but I don't really want to bang on it too much. I've had the misfortune of actually breaking a few. That probably took way too much out of there. Which it did. You dirty little bugger. I don't think. I thought it felt like whenever it went the whole way in there. Now, I'm just going to recut it. Okay, so now we're back to where we're not even fitting it all. That's the fit we're looking for right there. Good and solid. I am going to get rid of some material out here so that I don't, in the process, don't catch my hand on it. It's really the only reason I need to get rid of a little bit of material. Just sort of round it over a little bit. That way it's not sharp. So it's bottoming out on the shoulder, which is what I wanted to do. We're going to bring a tailstock up for the just in case. And then we can go back and we can finish this bottom. It should run true if we did everything right. And it does. So evidently we're doing some things right tonight. It did not like to be cut earlier, so we'll just keep on using our scraper. We'll rest a little bit close. The only problem of using the skew type scrape, one of the scrapers with a long bevel on, you got to keep things away from them a little bit. The tool rests back a little bit because you don't want this bevel to slide down over the side. See, there's a certain amount of resin in there because it wants to stick to the tailstock. Allows me to get a nice flowing curve. Like I say, if we use a cutting tool right here, it's going to want to chip this resin. That's why I stay away from the cutting tool. And we can pretty much shape everything on the outside here a little bit more. Because if we need to, we can take this back off. We can stick our fingers in here and say, well, how thick is this? And we got plenty of meat all the way around there. And put it back on and continue on. And things should have stayed just right where they should be, or right where they're at. But if we want to say, okay, we want to change the shape from up in here the whole way down, there's enough meat on the inside to do so. This piece could have been a little bit longer, but when you're dealing with burl and pieces of burl, you kind of have to do what it is you have for your availability of it. This certainly doesn't need to have a real small base on it either, in my opinion. I'd rather these be functional rather than something to sit on the shelf. That's just my opinion. I don't think we're not going to be able to use the tenon as part of our finished piece on this one. It would just make it. I could have made it smaller in diameter, but we do want to take some more off. I'm going to get rid of that. I do not like that little red dot out there in the middle of no man's land. I don't think. It might look kind of interesting to leave it there. It's still fairly deep right there too, if I want to take it out. Decisions. Just about gone. It goes in there a lot deeper than what I thought it did. I got to get back in here. to make my shape to what I want. I went to basically, this is just a small skew. And it's straight, so it allows me to get into that, down into that lower corner to make our curve what we wanted, what we need down in there. And hopefully we got rid of the little dot, just about. The little dot was a whole lot deeper than what I would have thought it would have been. So we'll just work a little bit more there. This doesn't have a burr on. This actually, it is a skew. So we'll just hone that edge, a couple swipes across the diamond hone to put it back to a sharp edge, which is what this resin and stabilized material will like. I didn't totally get it sharp either. So let's make sure, see whether we got rid of our little dot. Is gone. Good. And then we can finish up our shape down here. That down in there is all wood, so it needs a burr. Like night and day. Now we make sure we don't have anything torn or anything like that, which we don't. So now we can get rid of, this was something we could do with a foot, but I don't see anything really that we can do with that foot other than just get rid of it. Easy with the resin. That's a whole lot more concave than it needed to be. That's okay. Now we should be able to get rid of our tailstock. This is on there more than secure enough. Then we're going to put all our force is going to go that way again. So we'll stick with our scrapers. And go with the smaller one, which I got to put a burr back on it too. Got carried away on where I went in at there. I think I'm just gonna, just for giggles, we're just gonna leave a little. Let's see what it looks like. I don't like that hump. It's not spongy, so we're not that deep down there in the middle. Two little lines to put our initials in there, or our name in there. And we're back to sanding. We got wet sand, so we can get rid of the noise. Get our towel back. Protect things. Our water. So 220 is where we will start. Oh, slower speed. Slower speed down nice and slow. About 5 to 600 RPMs is usually what I sand at. Wet or dry, it doesn't really matter. Especially wet, as you can see, you can get, I shouldn't take my face shield off. You get a bath, you can get a bath pretty quick and easy when you're doing this wet. But it sands a whole lot better. Any of the stabilized stuff, stabilized, and this is stabilized in red, and also has, I think this is Lumelite slow, clear slow, pretty sure. This thing has been sitting around here cast for quite some time. We'll do the entire thing, bottom included. Bottom gets finished just as well as everything else. At least that's the way I've always been taught, and that's the way I do it. We're going to sand the longest with the coarsest grit, even though in this case it's only 220. We're going to clean off our gunk. The challenge is always getting the gunk out of the groove. I should have waited and put that groove in much later in the process. But it's a little late now, so that's 6, 320. It's got to be 320. Yep. This way you keep clean and sharp sandpaper all the time. And this we will sand the entire surface because we cut almost the whole way back up to the top. So that's 320. 400. You can see the amount of gunk that you get off of it. You need to take that off so that you don't just keep grinding that grit deeper and deeper. At least that's what I found to work the best. what works for me, put it that way. And it's just a matter of refining, making the scratches smaller and smaller. So we'll just cruise through the other couple grits. We'll get this thing dried off. We'll give it a coat of super glue, and then we'll buff it, and we'll be done. So that was 800. Last will be 1,000. A little bit messy to use water, but put a towel down, wipe things down, maybe re-wax the bedways when I'm done. It'll be all good. Last thing we're going to do is a little random orbit sanding, especially where the resin is at. That is the place that the radial scratches show up the most. The easiest to pick out, put it that way. Getting this water down in there on that wood is also probably making this tighter and tighter as I go. I don't want to play around with it too long on there because the wood's probably swelling up on me. Nope, didn't do too bad. I'll wipe that off and sit that there for a minute while I let that start to dry. And now I'm going to use a little cheater method on that face. Because I'm gonna put my coat of super glue on there as well. And the Parfix brands that I carry, because I am a distributor of it, but the only reason I am a distributor is because I like it so well, and it became hard to get a hold of. So I'm going to put wax on there. This is just a microcrystalline wax on that edge. That way any of it, because it is a wicking grade, any of it that might get down over that lip onto that piece will not stick fast to wax. Wax is not its friend. So that takes care of that. That goes back on. Get rid of the water. Water's quite dirty now. Give it a spin. We want this to dry. Moisture is what cures super glue. So we want this to be as dry as possible. So I'll even take a paper towel and sort of heat it up a little bit, burnish it a little bit. So that it's dry. My wife just got some pens. I normally do that with a pyrography pen on there. I'm going to try these pens. These are a permanent marker. And my wife is a decorative painter. And one of the painting instructors was talking about these pens. They're on Amazon. It says Shuttle Art Permanent Marker. So we're going to try this. This thing's just going to get my initials on it. I'm not sure whether the glue is going to dissolve them or not. If it does, I'm not really worried about it. Then I'll just come back with a pyrography pen and burn it in. I can do that after the fact, just as easily as I can do it right now. So now we should be ready for our next step. Will be one coat. Back to one coat of 3460. And then we'll switch over to buffing mode. Ideally, it would be to let this go overnight, because it does have a 24-hour cure time, which means it'll be as hard as it's ever going to get in 24 hours from now. But there's nothing says that I can't come back tomorrow or the next day and buff it some more when it's totally, absolutely cured. So we'll just put a nice, even, nice coat on there. I'm not worried about it being even because we're going to wipe off the excess anyhow. I just want to make sure it's totally covered and it's going to soak in any place that needs a little bit of filling in. Like I say, this has a 50-second open time. I just did some pens with them, or a pen, a couple weeks ago. Sort of trying some things out with it. One of the reasons I don't like to do pens, there's too much screwing around finishing pens. So my philosophy was, what happens if I do one single coat of the 3460, let it cure, and come back the next day and buff it. And that's what I did with it. And quite honestly, you can't tell that I've only put one coat on there versus 4 or 5 coats on, and did all the thing of sanding through the 9 million grits of sandpaper to make it super duper. This thing wasn't quite dry. It made it set up quicker. So there's a little place that's a little bumpy, but that's okay. Some of that I'll either buff off, or I'll just take a little bit of the 1000 grit sandpaper or 800 grit sandpaper and sand just that little area. Right now I'm more interested in getting it back off of there. And we'll just do the rest of this by hand, see if I can stick my thumb fast to the bottom. If I was smarter than the average bear, I would have had a glove on both hands. So I'm going to use the accelerator on it again. Like I say, we want to get the project done. We're just about ready to wrap it up. We'll shoot a little bit of accelerator around it. Probably way more than what I need. I'm going to sit this off to the side. Get rid of my glove. Get some stuff out of the road here, and we'll put the buffing wheel on. And we'll start with the lid, and then we'll come back to the base. Like I say, these are a good thing, and I have a whole box full of these little cutoffs. I generally keep most of them, just for that reason right there. Then I don't have to go and try and find something to make that jam chuck out of. I already have it. Get rid of a tool rest. It always manages to hit me in the elbow. Product we're going to buff this with is called Vonnex. Comes out of the UK. Another thing that I actually carry on my website. It would be very impractical as an individual to buy it out of the UK, because the shipping it costs me as much to buy the 10 bars that I buy at a time. It costs me that much or even a little bit more in shipping. But it's designed to polish lacquers and plastics, which everything that we have right now basically would constitute as a plastic. The resin is plastic. The stabilizing cactus juice is some sort of a plastic as well. Face shield is sort of an, my opinion, is a must, because these buffing wheels are constantly losing little pieces of cotton. As you can see, they're flying around. So the Vonex looks like baby poop. Buffing speed is 1700 RPMs. We're going to keep things moving. And it will bring it up to a very nice shine. Very simple, very quick. No 3 or 4 coats of some sort of a film finish. This is one and done. That particular, the 3460, if you so choose, you could put on multiple coats like you would if you were going to finish a pen with half a dozen coats of super glue on it. You can do that with that one. The other one that I carry is a 3408, which is strictly one coat and then one coat only. It will not cooperate with itself to put a second coat on. It will sit on the surface and look like a finely polished car. The only place I can't buff is down in the very bottom of this lid. I can do all the edges for sure. So there's our lid. Stop. There's our lid. Nice and shiny. You can see it reflects light quite well. Super smooth. That's the other beauty of it. I mean, it's super smooth. It stays smooth. The other thing I can do with this is also put a coat of carnauba wax on it. But since this hasn't cured, I won't do that till tomorrow or another day. I have some other stuff that I need to buff, so I will wait till that stuff, for that stuff to do the rest. We'll do the base. We're kind of pushing it a little bit. I know there's going to be some places that I'm going to have to sand or something with it a little bit. I'm not putting tons of pressure on it. I don't. Once again, our heat is never our friend in pretty much everything that we're doing. So we don't need to generate heat. Go in multiple directions. There's a place right here. The camera probably really won't pick that up. But there's a place right there that it's sort of set up on me. A couple places along that resin. Like I say, I'm not going to get excited. I'm going to buff the whole way around this. But then I'm going to come back with some sandpaper. A little bit of 800 grit paper. And I'm going to clean that off smooth. And then we'll just rebuff those little areas. That's what I do with the solid wood objects. Just put it on, and there's almost always a place that decides that it wants to do something weird. Whether there was moisture still present or something. Like I do a lot of natural edge bowls. So along the natural edge, it almost always wants to leave some places where has left like little rough spots. And as I'm buffing it and you feel them, you just stop and a little bit of, like I say, a little bit of 800 grit sandpaper and smooths them right off. And then you just rebuff those areas to make it super nice and smooth and shiny. Which, like I say, there's a couple places on this one. And it's generally, for whatever reason, it's in the resin part because I played around just a little bit too long. It's plastic on plastic, but you can now you can actually see them. These are little high spots right there. Is what it amounts to. So we'll get it down to where it's no longer a high spot. And we're doing it in a random orbit fashion. And our fingers always tell all where they're at. If you can't see them, your fingers will find them for you. So they need to be gotten rid of. Still a little bit right there. It will clog the sandpaper right up too, because everything you're doing is plastic. So when it's not wet, it clogs the sandpaper up. That's why I sand all this stuff wet. Just makes life a whole lot easier. A lot of reason there's this along this top edge is because it was already finished once. So it has a tendency, once there's one coat on and you go to put a second coat of this on, this particular product, it will set up quicker on itself than it will on bare material, whether it be wood or resin. So that's when you run into the thing of putting multiple coats on, and you're going to have to sand it back to get everything smooth and level. So we'll just hit it with a little bit sandpaper. Go back to buffing. A little more compound on. A little bit goes a long ways. The resin part doesn't get as shiny as what you want it to in this case, and it may or may not, shouldn't say that, may or may not. I still have my little jam chuck, which I didn't throw away, I just put it over off to the side. I can go back to that and use some of the real super fine, either the micro mesh pads or the 3M Zona paper that pen turners would use, and polish this, or basically you were sanding it to a super high grit, and then you can come back and buff it. You may not even have to buff it. You could probably use some of the plastic polish that you would use on a pen or something like that. The plastic polish that would be made for headlights. That'll work to polish some of this stuff up too. But if you give the Vonnex a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, it will polish right through those 800 grit scratches that we put in. Try and get a little compound right on the edge of the wheel so I can do this tenon sticking up here. Here's a place you missed. And don't catch edges and have it going flying across the room. Especially in my case, there's a concrete wall directly in front of me. Create static too, which likes to stick all those little fuzzies to it. But I think that has it. And the other thing we can do to it to add a little bit more shine would be a little bit of carnauba wax, which I did get out. So we might as well use a little bit of that. We're going to slow our speed down to about 900 RPMs. You go too much faster than the 900, you're running the risk of melting the wax. And when you melt the wax, it does these lovely little streaks in the wood, and you will be sitting there with some sort of a scraper or something to get it off, because carnauba wax, once it's melted and rehardened, is very, very hard. There actually, it looks like a little place that I need to go back after. But we can do that later. That's the base. The lid is already actually really quite shiny, but we'll give it a little, just a little wax. Extra level of sort of protection, fingerprint proof, although it's already pretty much fingerprint proof anyhow. And it is a very durable finish. I'm a truck driver by trade. I have a maple baseball bat that I use to check truck tires with. And I've used that same bat now for a couple years. And it checks quite a number of tires every day. And I don't hit tires gently. It has not cracked or anything like that. So it does make a very durable, lasting finish. Because it's not sitting, for one, it's not sitting on the surface. It's down in the pores of the wood. Maybe not quite so much in this application. It still is to a degree in this application, but when it's used on raw wood, would be more so. But that's our little lid box, and those little markers did work. The super glue did not dissolve it, which that's kind of lighten them up a little bit, so we might have to do something with that. So there's our little lidded box. Like I say, there's a spot that I need to go back after. You always find some of them once you start buffing, there's a couple little places there. But just like I showed earlier, I just go back over them with a little bit of 800 grit sandpaper, smooth them out, and rebuff it. Other than that, that's the extent of our project. Time to call it an evening. I appreciate anybody that stuck around and watched. If you'd care to subscribe, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, we'll see you another day. May actually be tomorrow evening. I have another blank that's very similar to this one ready to go. So until then, have a good evening. Thanks for watching.